Zara was a woman of simple dreams and quiet joys. She lived in a small yet lively village nestled between rolling hills and golden fields. Her days were spent tending to a quaint little shop she had inherited from her late parents. The shop, filled with handcrafted goods, fragrant spices, and colourful fabrics, was more than just a business. It was her home, her pride, and her connection to the people of the village. She knew everyone by name, shared their joys and sorrows, and found comfort in the rhythm of her predictable life. Yet deep inside her heart, there was a longing she never spoke of, a longing for something beyond the village, beyond the familiar faces and dusty roads. She had never stepped beyond the borders of her home, but she often wondered what lay beyond the hills. What kind of life existed in the cities she had only heard about in passing tales? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sudden storm swept through the village. The sky turned a deep shade of grey, and the wind howled through the trees, sending dust and leaves swirling through the streets. Zara hurried to secure the wooden shutters of her shop, struggling against the force of the wind. Just as she was about to latch the last one, a powerful gust sent a pile of baskets tumbling into the street. She groaned in frustration and rushed to gather them before they were ruined. As she bent down to pick up the scattered items, a strong pair of hands reached out and helped her. She looked up, startled, and found herself staring into the deep, steady eyes of a stranger. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. His clothes were simple, yet well made, and though his face was unfamiliar, there was something about him that felt strangely comforting. "You shouldn't be out in this storm," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Zara hesitated before replying. "Neither should you." A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips as he helped her carry the baskets back to the shop. Once inside, she studied him more closely. He was unlike any traveller she had met before. He carried himself with an ease that suggested confidence but not arrogance. He introduced himself as Kofi, a man passing through the village on his way to the capital. As the storm raged outside, he stayed a while, sharing stories of places he had seen, lands far beyond what Zara had ever imagined. She listened with fascination, drawn to the warmth in his voice, the way his words painted vivid pictures of bustling markets, grand palaces, and lands so different from her own. She found herself wondering who he truly was, but she did not ask. For now, she simply enjoyed the company of a stranger who made her world feel a little bigger, if only for a moment. Kofi became a familiar presence in Zara's life before she even realized it. At first, she assumed he was just another traveller passing through, but days turned into weeks, and he remained in the village. He visited her shop often, sometimes buying small trinkets, other times just lingering for conversation. He never spoke too much about himself, yet he had an uncanny ability to make others feel at ease. Zara found herself drawn to him, intrigued by his quiet confidence and the depth of his thoughts. He spoke of the world beyond their village in a way that made her feel as if she had already travelled there. His words carried the weight of experience, of someone who had seen and lived through more than he let on. He asked her about her dreams, her fears, her thoughts on things she had never spoken about before. No one had ever asked her such questions, and it made her feel seen in a way she never had before. But no matter how many conversations they shared, Kofi never spoke of his past. When Zara asked where he had come from, he gave vague answers, speaking only of distant lands and the journey that had brought him here. He never mentioned family, never spoke of a home. It was as if he existed only in the present, detached from anything that came before. At first, Zara tried to ignore the mystery that surrounded him, but as her feelings for him deepened, so did her curiosity. She wanted to know more, to understand who he truly was. Yet every time she pressed, he would gently steer the conversation away, leaving her with more questions than answers. Despite the lingering uncertainty, Zara could not deny what she felt. Kofi was unlike anyone she had ever known, kind, intelligent, and generous in ways that went beyond material things. He helped the villagers without hesitation, always offering a hand to those in need. He spoke with wisdom, his words carrying a sense of purpose that made her believe in possibilities she had never dared to before. She convinced herself that his past did not matter. He was here now, with her, and that was enough. She believed he was nothing more than a simple merchant who had chosen to stay. She never imagined that the man she was falling for carried a secret that would change her life forever. As the days turned into months, Zara and Kofi's bond grew stronger. What had started as casual conversations in her shop soon became something deeper, an unspoken understanding, a quiet companionship that neither of them had expected. Kofi was unlike anyone she had ever known. He listened to her dreams as if they mattered, as if she was meant for something greater than the life she had always known. With him, the village didn't feel so small anymore. Zara had never thought much about love before. She had seen marriages in the village, some filled with happiness, others burdened by duty. She had assumed her life would follow a similar path, eventually settling down with someone safe, someone known. But Kofi had changed everything. He had brought something into her life that she couldn't name, but she knew she didn't want to lose it. One evening, as the sun cast golden light over the village, Kofi took her hand and led her to the hills overlooking the fields. They sat in silence for a while, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. Then, without preamble, he turned to her. "I have nothing grand to offer you, Zara," he said softly. "No riches, no titles, only myself. But I promise you love, honesty, and a life filled with adventure, if you will have me." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She had always imagined proposals to be grand declarations, extravagant gestures. But this quiet sincerity, felt more real than anything she had ever known. She hesitated, not because she doubted her feelings, but because a small voice inside her whispered of the unknown. She still knew so little about his past, about where he had come from. But when she looked into his eyes, all she saw was truth. He had never lied to her. He had simply kept some things to himself. And so, she silenced her doubts. "Yes," she whispered, a smile breaking across her face. Kofi let out a breath of relief, pulling her into his arms. The village rejoiced when they heard the news. Preparations began for a simple yet joyous wedding. There would be no lavish ceremonies, no grand feasts, just laughter, music, and the people who had watched Zara grow. She couldn't have asked for anything more. As she stood in her small shop, running her fingers over the fabric of her wedding dress, she believed, truly believed, that she was stepping into a future of love and happiness. She had no idea that this marriage would lead her to a throne she never knew existed. The day of the wedding arrived with the first light of dawn, casting a golden glow over the village. The air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers, and the sound of distant drums echoed softly in the background. It was a day of joy, simple yet special, exactly as Zara had dreamed. The village square had been decorated with woven garlands and lanterns, and the people gathered in excitement. They had all come together to celebrate, bringing gifts of fresh fruit, hand-woven fabrics, and small tokens of goodwill. There were no grand halls, no extravagant feasts, just warmth, laughter, and love. Zara stood in front of the mirror in her small home, adjusting the delicate embroidery on her dress. It was nothing extravagant, just a soft, flowing fabric that had been stitched with love by the village seamstress. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the overwhelming realization that her life was about to change. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Outside, Kofi stood waiting. His usual calm demeanor remained, but there was something in his eyes, an emotion too deep to be spoken aloud. He wore traditional wedding attire, simple yet elegant, with intricate patterns stitched into the fabric. He looked every bit the man she had fallen in love with. As Zara stepped out, the village erupted in cheers. She walked toward Kofi, her heart pounding, her gaze locked onto his. When she reached him, he took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. The ceremony was performed under the open sky, led by the village elder. The vows were spoken with quiet conviction, promises of love and loyalty exchanged with the whole village as witnesses. As they sealed their union, the villagers erupted in joyous applause, their cheers blending with the soft hum of the evening breeze. Unbeknownst to Zara, among the crowd stood several unfamiliar faces, men who blended seamlessly into the gathering, but whose watchful eyes missed nothing. Royal guards, dressed as simple villagers, had come to ensure the safety of their king. A few steps away, Jabari, Kofi's most trusted advisor, observed the ceremony with quiet satisfaction. He had been sent to oversee the event, ensuring that no harm came to Kofi or his bride. His presence was unnoticed, his mission clear: to protect the secret, at least for now. As the night continued with music and dancing, Zara laughed freely, unaware that her life was about to change forever. She had married the man she loved, believing him to be a simple merchant. She had no idea that she had just become a queen. The days after the wedding were filled with warmth and happiness, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Kofi had always been calm and composed, but now there was a new urgency in his eyes, a weight he carried that she couldn't quite understand. One evening, as they sat outside watching the stars, Kofi took her hand and spoke with quiet seriousness. "Zara, there is something I need to tell you," he said. "We must leave the village. I have business in the capital, and I want you to come with me." The words took her by surprise. She had never left the village before, never even considered a life beyond the familiar streets and faces she had known all her life. "The capital," she echoed, searching his face. "It will be a new beginning for us," Kofi reassured her. "There is much I have to take care of there, and I want you by my side." Zara hesitated. She had always dreamed of seeing the world beyond the village, but now that the moment was here, uncertainty crept into her heart. She knew little about the capital, only that it was vast, filled with towering buildings, grand markets, and people from lands far beyond her own. But she had chosen Kofi, chosen this life with him. So, despite her doubts, she nodded. "Then we will go together." The journey was unlike anything she had ever experienced. They travelled in a grand carriage, drawn by strong horses, with a small entourage accompanying them. Zara marvelled at the changing landscapes, the endless fields giving way to bustling roads, small towns turning into larger settlements, and finally the looming silhouette of the capital appearing on the horizon. As they entered the city, she was overwhelmed by its sheer size. Towering buildings, golden domes, and streets filled with people from every corner of the land surrounded her. Merchants called out their wares, finely dressed nobles passed in ornate carriages, and the scent of spices and fresh bread filled the air. She turned to Kofi in awe. "You must be an important man to do business in a place like this." Kofi simply smiled. "You could say that." She still believed he was just a wealthy merchant, unaware that the man sitting beside her was not only important, he was the ruler of it all. From the moment they arrived in the capital, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The city itself was overwhelming, its towering structures, endless streets, and countless people unlike anything she had ever known. But what unsettled her most was the way people reacted to Kofi. As they walked through the busy streets, vendors who barely acknowledged other customers would suddenly pause and bow slightly when Kofi passed. Some even whispered to one another, their eyes lingering on him with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. Zara noticed, but brushed it off. Perhaps Kofi was simply well respected, a wealthy merchant with influence in the city. But the strangeness didn't stop there. When they arrived at what Kofi called their residence, Zara expected a comfortable home, perhaps a larger version of the modest village house she had grown up in. Instead, she was met with an estate so grand, it took her breath away. Marble pillars stretched toward the sky. Gold-trimmed doors stood tall and unyielding, and vast gardens spread across the land, blooming with flowers she had never seen before. Before she could voice her amazement, servants rushed forward, bowing deeply as they greeted them. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," one of them murmured. Zara blinked, certain she had misheard. But before she could ask, the servant quickly corrected himself. "Apologies, Master Kofi. We have prepared everything as requested." Kofi responded with a polite nod, as if this was completely ordinary. As the days passed, more peculiar things happened. The way the servants treated her, with a level of deference that felt unnatural. The way people's eyes followed her in the marketplace. The way officials in lavish robes would occasionally arrive, speaking to Kofi in hushed tones before bowing as they left. Zara tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was all because of Kofi's wealth. Perhaps successful merchants held more power in the capital than she had realized. But still the questions lingered in the back of her mind. One evening, as she sat on the balcony overlooking the vast city, she finally voiced her thoughts. "Kofi, who are you really?" He smiled, reaching for her hand. "I am your husband, Zara. Isn't that enough?" For now, she told herself it was. She had no idea that the truth was far bigger than she could ever imagine. One afternoon, as Zara explored the vast halls of their estate, she found herself wandering deeper than she had before. The corridors stretched endlessly, adorned with intricate carvings, golden chandeliers, and luxurious fabrics draped over towering windows. Every corner of the palace, because that's what it felt like, a palace, held something new, something grander than anything she had ever known. She had long accepted that Kofi was a man of wealth, but there was something more, something she couldn't quite grasp. Then, she saw it. At the end of a long corridor stood a set of double doors, slightly ajar. Curiosity pulled her forward. She stepped inside, her breath catching the moment she laid eyes on a massive portrait hanging in the center of the room. It was Kofi, but not the Kofi she knew. The man in the painting stood tall, draped in rich royal robes, adorned with gold and deep crimson fabric. A crown sat atop his head, its intricate design gleaming under the candlelight. His expression was regal, commanding, his gaze unwavering. This wasn't the humble merchant she had married. Her heart pounded as realization crashed over her. This was no merchant's home. This was no businessman's wealth. Kofi was royalty. The weight of it sent her stumbling back, her mind spinning. Why hadn't he told her? What did this mean for her? For them? The doors creaked behind her. She turned sharply to see Kofi standing there, his expression unreadable. He had known she would find out eventually. "Why is there a royal portrait of you?" Zara's voice trembled, her hands clenched at her sides. "Who are you, Kofi?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a quiet sigh, he stepped toward her. "I am Kofi, your husband," he said gently. "But I am also King Kofi of Zamora." The words rang through the chamber, heavy and undeniable. Zara shook her head, stepping back. "No, that's not possible. You told me you were a merchant." "I never lied," he said. "I simply didn't tell you everything." Tears burned her eyes. "Then what am I, Kofi?" He reached for her, his gaze soft yet unwavering. "You are my queen." Zara felt the walls closing in around her. Her breath came in short gasps as she stared at the man she thought she knew, the man who had just told her she was a queen. The weight of his words pressed down on her, making her feel small, lost in a world she didn't understand. "You lied to me," she whispered, shaking her head. Kofi took a step closer, his eyes filled with something she couldn't read. "I never lied, Zara. You just didn't tell me you were a king," she interrupted, her voice rising. "You let me believe you were a simple merchant. You let me think we were starting a life together, a normal life." Kofi's jaw tightened. "Because I needed you to love me for who I am, not for what I am." Zara let out a bitter laugh, wrapping her arms around herself. And what if I had known? Would that have changed anything? Did you think I would only marry you for your title? His silence was answer enough. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. Had anything been real? The nights they had spent talking under the stars, the way he had looked at her, the quiet moments when she had felt like she had found her home in him. Had it all been an illusion? I love you, Zara, Kofi said firmly. That has never changed. But I don't even know who you are, she said, voice breaking. You're not the man I married. I married a kind, humble traveler, not a king. I am still that man, Kofi insisted. Being a king doesn't change my heart. But it changed everything else. Zara turned away, walking toward the grand window overlooking the city. The streets stretched far beyond what her eyes could see, filled with people, his people. People who would now look at her not as Zara, the village shopkeeper, but as a queen. She had never wanted this. She had never dreamed of palaces, crowns, or royal duties. How could she be a queen when she didn't even know what it meant to rule? Kofi's voice was soft behind her. I was going to tell you. I wanted more time. She swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't know if I can do this, Kofi. For the first time, she saw worry flicker in his eyes. And for the first time, she wondered if love alone would be enough. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion, frustration, and overwhelming expectations. Zara had barely come to terms with the truth when she was thrust into a world she didn't understand, the world of royalty. The palace was grander than anything she had ever imagined. Its corridors stretched endlessly, lined with towering columns and walls adorned with gold and precious stones. Servants bowed deeply when she passed, their eyes lowered, their movements precise. Every morning, attendants arrived to dress her, style her hair, and teach her the ways of the court. There were rules for everything: the way she walked, the way she spoke, the way she sat at the royal table. Every mistake, every misstep was noted, whispered about behind delicate silk fans. And the nobles, they made no effort to hide their disdain. She is not of noble blood, she overheard one say. She is a commoner, unfit to rule, another scoffed. But the worst came from the Queen Mother. From the moment they met, Kofi's mother made it clear. Zara was not welcome. You have no idea what it means to be queen, the older woman said coldly, her gaze piercing. You do not belong here. Zara swallowed the sting of those words, but they clung to her, sinking deep into her heart. The court was a battlefield, and she was hopelessly unarmed. Nobles whispered behind her back, their eyes full of judgment. Some merely dismissed her as a passing mistake, a foolish decision Kofi would soon regret. Others saw her as a threat, a disruption to tradition, a queen who had no royal lineage. She felt trapped. Every moment, she longed for the simplicity of her old life, the small shop in her village, the freedom of being unknown. Here, every word mattered. Every action was scrutinized. She wasn't just Zara anymore. She was Queen Zara of Zamora, but she didn't feel like a queen. Late at night, when Kofi found her sitting alone in their chambers, she whispered, I don't think I can do this. He knelt beside her, taking her hands. You are stronger than you know, Zara. She wanted to believe him. But in a world where she was seen as nothing more than a commoner, she wasn't sure if strength would be enough. Whispers of war spread through the palace like wildfire. Prince Dakarai of the neighboring kingdom of Vashara had challenged Zamora's rule, claiming Kofi's reign was weak. Rumors swirled that he had already sent spies into the city, gathering information, looking for weaknesses. Zara listened to these hushed conversations from the shadows, her heart pounding. She had spent weeks doubting herself, questioning whether she belonged here. But now, something shifted inside her. She could not afford to be just an observer. If she was truly Kofi's queen, she had to act like one. Determined to understand the situation, she sought out Kofi's trusted advisor, Jabari. "I want to learn," she told him. "Teach me about diplomacy, about war, about the threats we face." Jabari hesitated, clearly unsure if she was ready, but he eventually relented. Every night, Zara pored over maps of Zamora and Vashara, learning their histories, their conflicts, their strengths and weaknesses. She memorized the names of noble families, the alliances that shaped the kingdom, and the trade routes that fueled the economy. And in doing so, she uncovered something alarming. Late one evening, while reviewing palace records, she noticed irregular shipments. Caravans that should have arrived had disappeared. Supplies meant for the army were missing. Someone was weakening Zamora from within. Dakarai's spies were not just watching, they were already acting. Instead of panicking, Zara devised a plan. During a royal banquet, where envoys from Vashara were in attendance, she carefully steered the conversation, asking seemingly harmless questions, gauging reactions, watching for nervous glances. It didn't take long before one of the visiting nobles slipped up, revealing too much. Zara exchanged a look with Jabari. They had their lead. That night, Kofi found her deep in discussion with the royal council, her confidence unshaken. "You uncovered spies?" he asked, surprise and admiration in his voice. Zara met his gaze, her chin lifted. "Yes, and I know how to stop them." For the first time since arriving in the palace, she felt a sense of belonging. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She was Queen Zara of Zamora, and she was ready to fight for her kingdom. The sun shone brightly over the capital as the grand bells of Zamora rang across the kingdom, announcing a momentous occasion, the coronation of Queen Zara. It had been a long, difficult journey. There were times she had doubted herself, times she had wanted to run back to the simple life she once knew. But Zara had changed. She was no longer just the village girl who had fallen in love with a mysterious traveler. She was a woman who had faced betrayal, rejection, and the weight of an entire kingdom's expectations, and she had proven herself worthy. The palace courtyard was filled with nobles, officials, and commoners alike, all gathered to witness the crowning of their new queen. Banners of deep crimson and gold draped the city, and the streets echoed with cheers of excitement. Inside the great hall, Zara stood before the high priest, dressed in royal robes of white and gold, the colors of Zamora's rulers. Her hands trembled slightly, but not with fear, with determination. Kofi stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. He had always believed in her, even when she had doubted herself. As the high priest raised the golden crown, the hall fell into complete silence. "Do you, Zara of Zamora, swear to rule with wisdom, justice, and unwavering devotion to your people?" She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I do," she said, her voice steady and strong. The crown was placed upon her head, and in that instant, she was no longer just Zara. She was Queen Zara of Zamora. The hall erupted in cheers, the sound spilling into the streets. The people had come to love her, not because of her royal blood, for she had none, but because of her heart, her courage, and her unwavering loyalty to the kingdom. She turned to Kofi, her husband, her king, the man who had changed her life forever. He took her hand and whispered, "Now the world will see what I have always known. You were born to be a queen." And as she stepped forward, greeting her people with grace and confidence, she finally believed it too. The days of doubt and struggle were behind her. Zara had stepped into her role as Queen of Zamora, not because of her birthright, but because of her heart. She had proven to the nobles, the people, and most importantly, to herself, that she was worthy of the crown. Beside her, Kofi remained not just her king, but her partner. Their love had endured deception, rejection, and the weight of an entire kingdom's expectations. And yet, through it all, they had emerged stronger. Together, they ruled with wisdom and compassion. Zara brought new ideas to the court, ensuring fair treatment for all, not just the noble class. She met with villagers, traders, and artisans, listening to their concerns, working to bridge the divide between royalty and commoners. Kofi often watched her with admiration, knowing he had made the right choice. She was not just his queen, she was his equal, his partner, his greatest strength. One evening, as they stood on the palace balcony overlooking the city, Zara found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. "I never imagined this life," she murmured, leaning against the railing. "There was a time I thought I didn't belong." Kofi turned to her, taking her hand in his. "And now?" She smiled, her eyes shining with quiet confidence. "Now, I know that being a queen isn't about where you come from. It's about how you rule, how you love, and how you lead." He kissed her hand gently. "You were always meant for this, Zara." As the city lights flickered below them and the stars stretched across the night sky, she knew, deep in her heart, that she had found her destiny. Not because she had married a king, not because she wore a crown, but because she had embraced who she truly was, a woman who had loved, fought, and risen to become the queen she was always meant to be. And so, together, King Kofi and Queen Zara ruled, not just with power, but with love. For in the end, true royalty was not defined by birth, but by the heart.